transformed the render pipeline from separate pixel and vertex shaders to unified programmable shader units.
Well, it's been a while, but I'm back with another database episode for the latest gaming and technology news. So let's start with the big announcement this month, just at the end of it, in fact, was AMD and their Radeon 9070. 9070 XT had a secondary launch when they kind of staggered and then changed their mind and did a turnabout on the eve of NVIDIA releasing their new RTX50 series cards, or 5000 series cards, over in CES, January 2025. And I was there for that launch, and it was really good. So they kind of almost launched it there. And physically, I saw cards. You can see them on screen. I was there. I touched them. I even saw FSR4 briefly. I did speak to Digital Foundry, and they saw more of it behind closed doors, along with some others. And fundamentally, that seems like a good step forward and very much needed. But it kind of highlights the area where they're leaning heavily most. And also, it reinforces what I've said before about strategic partnerships. So let's just go through the high-level view of what came out of that announcement and finally when they announced it. So the most important part was the price. So $550 to $600 for the 9070 and 9070 XT respectively, which is very competitive in the market, and it is competing directly with the 5070 Ti as they advertise in their own section of the announcement, but also the 4080 market. But what needs to also be stressed here is they're pushing for that market in terms of the entry or enthusiast level market. So the people that want to play at console levels or above, but they don't want to spend, a couple of grand on a GPU and a really high level setup. So $700 they're saying is the target price in terms of what they reckon 85% of the market is buying. And if you look at the Steam survey in terms of the overall market, and I'm going to do that right now in front of you, you can see that over 8% of the market is 4060, and then combined 4060, 3060 and 4060 Ti, that's over 20% of the Steam market is NVIDIA. And therefore, if you go all the way down the stack, you can see we're down to like 1% of the market. It's the first time Radeon get a look in. And they only own circa 10% of the market at the moment. It's shrinking year on year to NVIDIA. So if they can take 10% of what's left above it, then they're going to double their market, if not more. So that is what they're going for. They're going for those older generation cards. They're pricing it at a level that makes it competitive, and $150 to $200 less than the 5070 Ti, which is the same market also, means that they've got a chance to get in there with all the other boosts and benefits this is offering. But the reality is it all comes down to the price, but I'll discuss that right at the very end because it's not fair. So I do want to praise them for actually using direct raster ray tracing without anything turned on in their comparisons to 7900 GRE. Thumbs up for that. That's one of the things I didn't like about what NVIDIA did when they showed off all of their stuff, even at the event, and they leaned heavily into the frame generation and the DLSS, which is excellent, and it is a core USP. I've said this before, and it's probably most likely you're going to turn it on. But it's always good to just go raster, ray trace, and full-on native 4K, native 1440p, which I still think was impressive from the NVIDIA series anyway. So I don't even know why they didn't lean into that. But again, here we're seeing similar levels of performance in terms of like-for-like best-case scenario, as I covered on my 5090 coverage over on IGN. And there's more to come on that side over here on this channel. But back to the AMD side, and fundamentally, the big hits here are the ray tracing, which is up to 2x faster than RDNA 3, and even the 9070 specs come scarily close to the PS5 Pro specs when you look at it. Based on CU counts, clock speeds, they deliver similar teraflop counts, but obviously the clock speeds are far higher in the 9070, and then they're even higher in the 9070 XT, and that's got more CUs as well. It's 60 obviously on the PS5 Pro, and it's 64 on the top-end machine, and 56 on the 9070 flat. But as I discussed and demonstrated, this is kind of a largely relevant figure anyway, teraflops. It doesn't really mean anything. I did all that back on my before PS5 even launched video, the teraflops is a live video. Way before anyone started to figure out that it was, and now everyone talks about it, including Mark Cerny even. He did a video after I did one. I'm not saying copy me, by the way, I'm just saying it became this thing where everyone now shifts away from the teraflop conversation. But the ray tracing updates, yep, nice. It's as good as we would hope, and probably even likely higher due to other bits I'm about to mention. So the register updates that they've made, and the ray tracing areas in particular, do look very close to what the PS5 Pro offered. As I detailed in my preview in the PS5 Pro video that I covered, they've gone from BVH4 to BVH8, which is the same as both. They've increased ray traversal units within the TMUs, and they've increased compression, which means we see the same 2x potential uplift in that expensive ray intersection and BVH sample, and therefore the false positives. Now, although they've gone further here with AMD with that orientated box improvements to reduce the false positives, and of course the Infinity cache itself, 64 megabits here, which will be 64 megabytes, sorry, which will or should improve the throughput and potential results over what the PS5 Pro can do, because that's using just registers to get the bandwidth required for their fused network CNN that they've got going on. But once developers recompile the code for this, which will be required, the same as it is on PS5 Pro, and I've discussed all that again, so go and check out my other videos around how it all works, which puts it right at the same place in that 9000 range in terms of specs as the 7900 GRE they used to compare it against in their slide. So the high end does have some margins here if the new card scales analogous with the RDNA 3 and the clock speed boost that that offers. So the smaller node and big clock hike is going to be a big reason for the performance uplift we saw in the graphs and that power wattage output, which is lower. Now, the register updates also look to be a mix of the cache scrubbers from PS5 and that freer register override function Sony added to their GPU, that custom RDNA 2X version they discussed at length when Mark Cerny did his PS5 Pro technical deep dive. And they use that for their ML workload, the local registers within their CNN fused network. So they effectively ensure the bandwidth they need to get all that information out in terms of get it onto a local chip, tile it, and then fire it back into the image and build those tiles async so that you've got the most amount of input in terms of doing all those matrix calculations locally on chip. And again, I covered all this in my RDNA 3 preview, actually RDNA 2 in fact, back with the 6000 series launched, where I detailed how like memory registers and such work, and also in previous videos, including my retro Dreamcast video, Videologic's own tiled deferred rendering, and how it works and how it helps in terms of that performance now, that console, and the GPU on the PC side, the Neon 250, which had quite a few changes in terms of architecture, and I've covered that in previous videos. You can see how all that works. I did that a year or so ago, and there's an even more detailed one that's up for patrons. It was up way months ago or last year. And the first two episodes are here on YouTube, so you can check those out, which kind of discusses how that works. It's very similar techniques to what we're seeing now. It, again, just shows you how far ahead Videologic were. But in short, we can see that the same AI block upgrades here in RDNA 4 offer similar high-level bullet point improvements in int8, int16 calculations, which are core precision areas that work very well for machine learning language workloads. In short, PS5 Pro and RDNA 4 do share many similarities, as expected, and as I talk about often in our corporate world that I know very well, that strategic partnerships between companies can be a cost and quality benefit to both parties. And here, AMD and Sony are working to raise both of their levels together with likely slightly different final goals and paths that clearly share key locations along their journey, and that's effectively what they're doing here. So we're seeing similar errors of ML-powered RDNA 4 with FSR4 being exclusive to it. So this is definitely a key area, I think, to make this card even more attractive. And based on what I saw and what other people have seen in more demos, it's significantly better than FSR3. Not quite a DLSS 4, which I think is amazing in terms of the updates that's brought recently, but it's definitely a big step forward. And the fact that they're leaning into machine learning here means that it will or should be very performant, even better than what we've seen with PSSR, which has been a bit of a mixed results in terms of game-to-game and overall engines, but it is still early days. Now, I have heard that AMD is trying to get this running on older 7000 and 6000 range cards, but likely, even if they do, performance will be far higher in terms of the cost of running it. Now, back to pricing. So these cards, again, they're not going to go for the top end of NVIDIA. NVIDIA's too far ahead. They're not even going to compete at the ray tracing levels. And the ray tracing demo they showed off, I thought was a bit poor. I don't know why they showed it off. It had a lot of noise in it. It still had ghosting in it. It had a lot of artifacts, and it wasn't very stable. And it was 1080p as well. That I can't find a 4K version of their presentation. So, yeah, I don't know. The ray tracing demonstration they showed probably wasn't a highlight for me, even though the demo back in the day was, the toy shop was very popular. This didn't seem like it had much effort put into it and almost rushed through. But anyway, that aside, I think overall their ray tracing in games will be better. I think overall their rasterization in the games will be better. And it could compete around that, 4070, 4080, 5070 Ti level. That's the target in terms of performance it's going to run for. Probably slightly worse in terms of ray tracing, but not significantly so. And that NVIDIA 5070 Ti and 5070, they're all kind of the same comparison, but they're nowhere near close to MSRP, as we all know. It's really, really hard to get one. I'm lucky enough that NVIDIA sent me mine for review, but realistically, not the 5070, I didn't get one of those, and I couldn't buy one. I tried to buy one. But physically right now, you can't buy them, and if you do, the prices are far higher. And all of this really hangs on AMD keeping that price there. And my concern is that they referenced in their slide around the fact that they're willing to pay up to £700 for a GPU, and $700, and effectively they've said $550 to $600. So if both of those creep up $100 in MSRP when they actually get out on the market, then you're going to pay $650 to $700, which sits still below the target price, but it's now getting very close, within $50 or $100 of the 5070 Ti, and potentially the 5070 as well in terms of the price if you can actually get them. So all of this really hangs on the fact that can AMD get stock out in the market? Can they make sure that people can buy them when they want? And does the MSRP stay consistent at that $550, $600 market? And again, all the afterboard manufacturers, the IOBs, they're going to make different cards with more power, and they even reference an overclock version in here that closed the gap up and exceeded, on average, the 5070 Ti. So there is an overclock version here that's going to boost more power, but again, that means the price is going to go up. So yeah, I'm even though the hardware is good and the price was good, I don't think it's great, because right now, as we know, MSRP isn't really worth the paper it's printed on, and for a lot of retailers, it's hard to get stock, and therefore for us consumers, it's impossible to buy it at a decent price. So it's nice that it's out in the market. It's nice that they finally announced it. I still don't know why they did what they did, other than they panicked and went round the loop, and this is their plan. I don't think this plan was great in terms of the time it took to get to this point. But overall, it's not a bad demonstration, but it's not going to blow anyone's socks off, and it really isn't going to upset the market. But what it could do is claw back some of that market to AMD when people want to upgrade, and instead of going from a 3070 or a 4060 or a 3060, they're going to lean into one of these cards and potentially get quite a big leap and actually benefit from what AMD offers over at NVIDIA. And it was good for competition, because I think AMD can afford to gain some of the market back, and NVIDIA can certainly afford to lose it, because I don't think the people that are on those cards are going to jump in to buy a £1,000 or £2,000 GPU at this moment in time from the NVIDIA side. So realistically, it's probably not a lost sale as much as it is somebody just upgrading at this point rather than moving. So we'll see where this pans out in terms of the market, but I think AMD have done a better launch than the 6000 series, because they didn't kind of price it and then reverse it. But I still think it looks bad because of the way they've done it. And overall, the presentation was a bit flat. And 1080p, what on earth? And final piece, the bandwidth wasn't that high anyway, but I also noted that a lot of the slides say up to, in terms of the specifications, 20 gigabit GDDR6, which means there could, and almost certainly will be, cards that will be lower spec speeds of those. So just be careful you don't end up with like a 14 or 8 gigabit kind of speed memory GDDR6, and therefore you're going back down to 448, 576 kind of speeds, which isn't going to make a huge difference, but every little bit counts when you're at this segment of the market. So just note that as well. I did record all of this before the actual reviews came out, during the event, the day after the event, effectively. But due to constraints and all the hassles I normally have, this is post that. So just hang on to the end of the video, where I've got a new section around the RTX 9070 reviews and physical hardware. So just stay tuned.
FSR4 uses the new FPA data type in the RDNA4 architecture to balance quality and performance. The result is a flexible solution that works with the existing FSR 3.1 framework.
So next up, PSVR 2 has got a price cut permanently, and this has been up and down all over the place since it effectively launched, or at least about 8 months after it launched. They've played with prices, and what you can see now is they've actually got a discount where you can get both the full pack with Horizon Call of the Mountain for the same price as the actual one without the game. So you get a free download effectively. So they've gone back to the old days of getting a free pack in game. That's very rare you get for a console, or in this case a HMD. So now that it's dropped down to a price that puts it right in competition with the Quest 2, I think that now that PSVR 2 really has a chance to make a bigger impact in the VR space. And it's an excellent headset. I've reviewed it already. I've covered multiple games. Everyone knows that watches me for ages. I'm a big VR fan. Effectively, it's only time why I don't cover as many games as I play. But realistically, the PSVR 2 is an amazing headset for the PC space. It's an amazing headset for the PS5 console space. And that means it works exceptionally well across both. And it's in a unique position. And this is its USP, which I keep saying the same thing. I don't know why Sony don't make more of an effort to get themselves out in the market and promote this. It's as if they've just thrown it out there and forgotten about it. And it's a great, great shame. Because in terms of hardware and what it delivers, it's exceptional. It's up there with some of the best stuff they've ever delivered. And it has the opportunity, I always say this, to reinvent gaming like it used to be when the arcades came out, then home consoles and PCs and computers and the Amiga and stuff, and then when 3D came out, it's got the chance to do that again. And it's not being utilised heavily. But with this price range, with what it delivers across PC and console alike, I think it has an exceptional amount of value that could be delivered across everybody, and it could really push the VR market much, much higher than the Quest currently is, which is the only one that it's really competing with. But realistically, it also benefits a lot of the hardware that's inside the PS5 and certainly the PS5 Pro, and there's games that are boosted on it. So it's a great shame that they've done this kind of low-key. They've just said, as of March, it's going to get discounted. You'll find it cheaper at £399 or £349. So it's quite a big discount from the £400 and something it was at launch. And like I say, it puts it right in contention with the Quest 3. Yeah, it hasn't got wireless options, obviously, but it's a much better experience in terms of visual hardware anyway. So the wireless one isn't like for like. You'll never get anywhere close to PSVR 2 quality on a wireless Quest 3 headset, but obviously the Quest 3 does both. So there are pros and cons for each in terms of the image quality and the lenses. But overall, I think it's great that they've done it. I just wish they'd advertise it, but I'll be trying to sing its praises as much as possible and I'll certainly cover games. So if any of you out there that are big VR players, leave your thoughts and feedback below on games to cover, both in the Quest PC space and PC, PS5. I'm not saying just PS5. So I play both. I use it often. Anyway, I think it's a great boost in terms of the PSVR and VR as a whole. So hopefully Sony can do some advertising and get more games out on it so that people can actually buy it and use it.
It's a decisive battle between the grey males who fight for peace and the black bears who seek the
And we're back again with brand new games because this is the games channel and the Korean developers are back. So after the stellar hit that was Stellar Blade, another Korean developer in Pearl Abyss has long been making their presence known. One of their most impressive and most popular games was Black Desert, which I've never actually played, but it's an MMO across PC, console and mobile. Now, their new game looks right up my street. Another massive multiplayer online RPG with single-player elements and looks stunning. It's been in development since at least 2019, and it's changed somewhat since the reveal way back then. But why I love it and why I think it's amazing, so a few key features. I'm a big advocate for own in-house proprietary. I hate all of this off-the-shelf, commodity-based solutions that are going on. Unreal Engine has loads of faults, loads of issues. I've got a whole issue around and a video that I'm working on with speaking to some developers over the past few months and stuff in terms of issues that comes from the game, from the engine itself. It's not all bad, but obviously, again, this is what happens when you democratize something at this point. It becomes a committee that drives what is important to everyone else. And the fact that teams use their own solution. So here, again, they're using their own in-house proprietary engine, which I'm personally over the moon about. And the results clearly speak for themselves. Now, again, this is what I mean about the fact that you can go over the top on just having tick boxes and tech tick boxes, and I'm a big supporter of having it for the right reasons. So tech should drive the technology, should drive the game or the art, not the other way around. And this looks like it's doing exactly that, the former, which is specifically the NPC count looks massive, the dynamic world interaction, the AI, the world building, all of that looks brilliant, you know, right up to the Witcher 3 levels that we're looking at here, which is clearly a big inspiration for the team and the game itself. It's quite obvious. And it's completely single player with a completely separate online multiplayer mode that you can flip back and forth on, which is beautiful, perfect. And everything about it looks great. The lighting, the materials, the quality of the effects, it's all excellent. It's high quality throughout, but always kind of balancing that with the best balance of how that technique and effects work with the art. They got lots of grounded look. The ground is tessellated, so it creates depth of those cobbled streets and stone walls and the castle moats and other key areas in this fictional, I think it's called Pywell continent it's set within. So And it mirrors kind of the Northern European, English, Scottish medieval setting, clearly. So the Scottish Celtic heroes in Macduff, who's a grey mane, which is like two clans, and his band of warriors set off on a crusade, effectively, to save the land. And it kind of mixes up a vast single-player story with that separate but integrated online mode, as I mentioned. And you can kind of get your own avatar and you can customize it online, but the in-game one, I read on one of the developer commentaries that it's fixed, so you can't change your character too much. You know, his clothes, but not his looks and his features. It's kind of built around that, which is fine. At the end of the day, you don't need to constantly tailor every character to your own ends. It's nice, but it's not the end of the world for an RPG. Full depths and environment are not known, so I don't know how far it's going to go. But like I say, I do get like a Witcher 3 Assassin's Creed future vibes to it. So there's definitely some technology there, wizardry powers, and some special alien-like abilities and weird stuff going on. And it might even be flicking back and forth with future and past vibes, mix of technology. And again, Witcher 3, magic combat, world building, all look very, very good. I love the setting. I love the fact that it's not just based around standard rinse and repeat colour tones. The art style is realistic, it's gritty, it's violent. The combat looks very visceral, very fast. The authentic feel of the history and the period all come through. The push for North European accents as well in the English dub is excellent. Really, really big fan of that. I welcome it a lot. And it comes on the back of games like The Witcher 3, Kingdom Come Deliverance 1 and 2, Final Fantasy 16, and more recently, all of those had like English and Northern European accents. And that is exactly what you want because it's kind of authentic to the style. And I'm a big fan of it. And I think it brings you back. You can obviously have the different dubs. And if you've got different languages, then you're going to have people that kind of do their own languages in German, French, whatever. But reality is, I like the fact that it's doing that for the English dub. I'm a big fan of it, and I think it's authentic. Hopefully they'll flip-flop as well. So one of my big pet peeves is when you get TVs and TV shows and games where it's set in, like, France or it's set in, I don't know, Africa, and everyone's speaking perfectly good English or American accents. It's the worst thing in the world. There's a show that I love called Tokyo Vice, which it's got some ups and downs on it. But one of the things I love about the show Tokyo Vice is everything is in Japanese. So it very rarely, and only when it makes sense, people speak English. And I love that. I love that flip-flop between the language because it's authentic. So hopefully they'll do that here as well when they go into Norse areas and the language changes. They keep that area accurate. That's something I hope anyway. So again, going off on a bit of a tangent there. I love the push for cool return to gameplay on it. So the whole trailers and the gameplay that they've gone story first. It's a vast, honest, direct stream of pure gameplay that they've showed. I think it was like 30 minutes, the whole thing. And the footage looks excellent. And it's not the standard stuff that we see, that kind of trite canned CGI trailers, slow motion cutscenes, flash fade to drums. And that kind of gives every game recently seems to have that effectively early mid-2000 Linkin Park trailer vibes. And you can see, feel and understand exactly what they're going for here. And it's simply a case of, if it's not for you, then ignore it. It's totally not up your street. They're not trying to hide it from here. And the teams have a goal. They have their goal. And they're making a game that they themselves want to play. And they're sharing this with everyone to find out if their audience is there. And if it belongs to that audience, then they'll buy it and they'll pick it up. And they might bring people over to that audience when they see the gameplay. But they're not hiding it from you. They're being very upfront and honest. So therefore, you can't actually get a bait and switch where you're looking at it and thinking, what does this do? And then you end up, when you buy the game, it's not what you thought it was. It's pretty obvious what this game's delivering, what its aims are, and who it's for. So if it's not for you, then absolutely fine, but it definitely is for me. And I'd rather have that where they know their audience, they target their audience, where, again, what happens is committees drive games and then they try and make a game for everybody. They're trying to sell to everyone, and that's a fool's errand. It's a foolhardy mission for sure for anyone and any company doing it. And it's always driven, like most things, by the marketing and finance teams and the profit-driven aspects of games. And here, not seeing it, I'm loving this aspect from a lot of Japanese and Asian, Chinese, and obviously Korean developers are all trying to push through to make the game they want. And indie do the exact same thing. And this all has an impact on Western game development in the past 10 years far too much. In kind of the AAA corporate space is really trying to push hard on this, alongside kind of vanity projects that should have been canned at the proof of concept stage. All those kind of things have happened very, very often in a lot of games. And when they come out, everyone scratches their head thinking, why have they died? And it's echo chambers. And the team aren't doing that here. They're making the game, but they're sharing it for long periods of time in huge drafts to get feedback from the audience and tweak it within the realms of what their aspects are. So to me, it's the best way of doing it. The absolutely best way of doing it. And on another tone, it's the Battlefield stuff where they're trying to get feedback from there. They're trying to do the same thing. They're making a game, but giving a select audience early access to see whether or not that is the right thing, they're going in the right direction or not. They're not going to change their overall aim of the game, but it might help them finalise some areas that didn't come out very well, i.e. Battlefield 2024. Anyway, I've waffled on a bit. Looking forward to Crimson Desert. Think it looks amazing. I don't think it's pushing the top-end visual quality and boundaries, but it doesn't have to. It just has to do the right things well and not make mistakes in the wrong places. It looks fun, it looks dynamic, it looks vast, it's visually very impressive, and I'm sure it'll run very, very well across a multitude of hardware specs and not like the current swathe of games that rely on upscaling and other techniques. I bet this game balances the art, the design, and the gameplay with the visual quality and the effects. And that, for me, is a surefire hit and a winner. And the interest on it looks high, so I'm hoping that when I get access to it and I can play it, I'll bring some more coverage on this game. It certainly looks very, very good. And like I say, right up my street in terms of scratching that itch of The Witcher 3 and recently playing, obviously Kingdom Come and recently Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. So it's that balance, which I quite like in terms of accurate medieval style, but also mixed with that Tolkien style, Lord of the Rings, fantasy, Dungeons and Dragons epic. So looking forward to it. It's definitely my kind of thing. Now, some big news ahead of GDC later this month, or at least next week, coming out for Nvidia and Orbifold Studios, I think. Their latest and clearly greatest RTX remix title, the 2004 seminal Half-Life 2 drops a fully playable demo on Steam on March 18th, with a full launch hopefully later this year, although they have been working on it for a very long time, and it has been a very passion-filled project, so I'm looking forward to seeing it. And after seeing it in the pinky subsurface epidermis flesh in itself at CES in January earlier this year, I know we're in for a treat. Now, Nvidia held a briefing for press before this information dropped yesterday, as I'm recording this, so that more information can be discussed. But this game really shows what good, talented teams can do with the toolkit, and effectively what Lightspeed Studios have been making with the previous games. So it does come out of its long beta phase, the entire RTX remix this month, and it includes kind of new neural shading and more RTX branded features than a Nintendo game port. But overall, the Half-Life 2 update and complete redo here, it's effectively a high quality remaster for free, looks excellent. Say for free, there might be a charge for the final mod, but the demo is certainly free. But that makes sense. There's a lot of work gone into this. And obviously, I don't have the demo as yet, but I have seen it in the flesh, literally. And I've seen lots of information from Nvidia and the Orbital team directly. So it kind of offers a few improvements, which you can clearly see in the trailer. So improved PBR-based materials and models to some drastic and significant new models here. And they need those because they're trying to support the new lighting and effect surface. So you've got subsurface scattering on the head crab's mandibles, so you can see light penetrating through, which is, I think, a first for ray trace games. There's increased geometry, and this is obviously needed for the ray intersection and the quality that the lighting needs. So we can see that here. And so not only has the lighting been pulled into the modern level, but the polygon and material quality has also been improved with improved geometry and materials that reflect the accuracy of the light that's hitting it. So you're getting more of those correct, diffuse, specular, and other elements of light sources, including, like I say, subsurface scattering. It's also got volumetric ray trace lighting, which creates kind of realistic shadows casting through smoke and technically unlimited light sources. Now, the game is still a hybrid render of raster and ray tracing combined, but it now uses that path trace lighting past the holy grail. So this unification of lighting, reflection, GI, and shadows means that we can get true area lights, any shape, and as many light sources as needed. And as they are unified within that path tracing pass, it is a classic economies of scale benefit that I talk about a lot. Now, although on that score, do expect it to be very, very demanding on even the best RTX hardware out there without, yep, you guessed it, DLSS upscaling, restir, frame gen, and even some new features in neural radiance cache. Now, this effectively builds on from a form of restir, that's reservoir spatial temporal importance resampling, which remains a GI option actually in the menu, so you can flick back and forth between the two. And what this does is it collates and weights pixel and ray samples both spatially and temporally over time into a cache. And then it uses this data to improve the quality of real-time GI bounce and occlusion on surfaces within the scene. Now, this is a small render cache running on the GPU. So this is a neural cache shader running on the GPU at the time. And again, it's all part and parcel of the additional benefits that alongside this with DirectX 12 in terms of them updating a lot of their neural rendering techniques that both NVIDIA and AMD will be using. So That's what it does here, and it mixes with the RTX denoiser and other aspects to get like a more stable but detailed image. And you can see it on the surfaces in some of the examples they gave in the trailer, where you can see much better occlusion and light sourcing and detail in the surface mattes of the cobbled streets and other areas of the game. And when they showed this at the demo at CES as well. Now, once I get hands on the demo, I will cover it in more depth, as I did way back with the Quake 2 and Portal 2 RTX updates. But as you can see, there's still heavy temporal nature of the path tracer. It's very visible in the demo here, in the trailer. Here, the spider-like Antillions show the ghosting from the shadows on the floor as they move. You can see it on the screen here. Now, this is still going to be an obvious trouble issue or trouble spot when you're sampling at such a sparse level and then filling in the blanks with important sampling spatial and temporal buffers. But the lighter material and improved mesh quality here between the old classic 2004 game is still excellent. And even at times, it may be, in my opinion, leaning a little too much into the OTT side of the amount of additions in the scene rather than balancing that between the main art style of the game itself. I am keen to test it next week and hopefully myself dig a little bit further into it and see what it does and where it works, and obviously play around with the options in the menu to try and maybe get a better balance between those two aspects. Not saying I can do a better job than the team, by the way, just personal preferences, as is always the case when it comes to visual features like this. But it also highlights another area, which is how innovation has really slowed since the game launched. The still gorgeous 2004 game is now over 20 years old, and we're kind of seeing that old games and modernising them using this RTX Remix toolkit and API, which really does enhance the game, but it doesn't transform the game in terms of it's still the bare bones of that original game there. So had these techniques been available, the art, the design, the techniques got into the game itself still work in terms of how they set the scene, how they design the levels, how they design the lighting structure. All of that is still very impressive considering the limitations back then. So again, it is a pet peeve of mine in terms of we are now leaning too heavily into that side rather than balancing the two, which always used to be the case. But the API solution itself, the RTX Remix solution, it's great. I mean, it uses the DXVK SDK, so it's an API Vulkan render backend, and that's what the entire solution is built on. And it's obviously working well here and with other previous titles, which we've seen. It's based on DX8, DX9, and recently DX10 games with Left 4 Dead also getting the RTX treatment. But theoretically, DX11 games could also be included using the renderer. But again, this solution is all kind of based around fixed function pipelines. So any changes beyond that, they kind of bring a lot of inherent complexities that come with DX10 plus APIs, makes the solution much harder or technically more involved because you've got to do it on a per game or per engine basis. Hence why Left 4 Dead is the only DX10 game at the moment that supports this, unless there's one that I don't know of. So yeah, I'm impressed with it. I think it's really pushing the technology hard. I think it's going to push GPUs hard. But overall, it's, again, this is what I've said before, this is a good selling point for NVIDIA. They've pushed this out themselves with their own internal studios, the Lightspeed studios, and then they're passing this out to the community now, fully available for everyone to go in and start modding old games. So technically, it feeds itself because they've invested all this time, effort, and R&D into it, and now handing it over to the community to basically create these kind of mods. And I really am looking forward to what the teams can make, because the team here from Orbifold have done a great job, and it's a classic game. So obviously they've got permission from Valve and all that official stamp of approval in terms of getting it out. So I am looking forward to testing this more, but also what comes from the fact that this will now be out of beta and into public release very, very soon. People can actually start using it in anger, and I might even have a go myself. Looking good, and you can't beat a game of Half-Life 2, can you?
It's probably not a problem. Probably, but I'm showing a small discrepancy. Come here! Gordon! Get away from the beat of that!
Okay, next piece of news. A new Xbox Handheld, or new Xboxes. I stated this back in 2015 that Xbox would go the SEGA multi-platform direction. And then around 8 years or so later, they did it. So only a year after that video, in 2016, I also said that they would also go the full SEGA in the hardware space with an OEM licensed spectrum of Xbox machines. I said this.
As I mentioned last year, we have now seen Microsoft very focused on converging into a single unified platform with PC, phone and console all running under the Windows 10 umbrella, agnostic of chipset or badge. With AMD the given partner in all of this for the internals, I can easily see Microsoft franchise with independent hardware manufacturers like MSI, Asus, Gigabyte, etc., and sell Xbox 2 or Xbox Pro, or whatever they call it, as a spectrum of products.
And it appears to not only be a few months away from coming true, but of course, I'm not a psychic, so many YouTubers and politicians and business advisors all preach that they are, or they're the new Messiah or Nostradamus. And as I always say, be aware false prophets. A famous book said that, and I'm no such thing. But I have been around for a while in this space, and thus the old adage is as true now as ever, which is history does always repeat itself. And those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. So Microsoft has often lived kind of in their own Groundhog Day since they started in the late 70s, early 80s in the kind of application space on the Apple Mac. And in that time, they have taken many a lesson from other companies and much more besides, and they kind of continue to grow in that technology space. But it appears using the licensed IP method I discussed then has become their new route to ensure the gigantic cost of the acquisitions that they've done in terms of their remaining relevant in the entertainment business, the biggest business on this planet in terms of entertainment medium, is recouped as fast as possible. And that's a big drive for all companies. ROI is everything. It's everything. Every decision can come down to follow the money. But where better than the new buzz market of handheld PCs, driven by an ever-increasing drive to shrink hardware size, power and cost to fit in the palm of your hand. And that is really where a lot of companies are driving now, because there's no more growth, as I said before, in terms of just getting more and more out of that same, shrinking the die, get more power on it, and therefore get more performance. That's dying. That's why you're seeing all these kind of DLSS, PSSR, FSR solutions, frame generation. All that's going to continue. So it's now working smarter, not harder. That's always going to be the problem. But that doesn't mean that we can't get high-powered machines into the palm of your hand in a very small package. That is a growth area for hardware, and that's probably where a lot of companies are spending their time. It's certainly in the server space in terms of getting more and more into a single footprint to try and minimize your infrastructure costs. And this is one thing that I do definitely see a growth area in terms of driving it. So the PC handheld area is kind of shrinking all that down to get more power in the hand. And again, a time that I worked through from the late 80s to early 2000s was that this was always the case. So Microsoft, they kind of chase the market. They've always chased the market. They're very slow to react and see the direction of travel the market's going in. So Steam, and specifically SteamOS in particular, was always their biggest threat here, and they kind of been blind to it, but Valve hasn't. And despite ex-Microsoft employee himself, Gabe Newell, failing multiple times to secure the link into the mainstream with the Steam Box and other attempts to get that in, that true Trojan horse was the Steam Deck that kind of achieved that. Even though I think the recent number says it sold about 3 or 4 million, maybe 5 million since launch. People say that's a bad number. It's not, because it's a growth market for them. It's securing more people to buy from Steam. That's their point. The hardware is a route to market. So Steam Deck just improves their sales on Steam, because people will buy more games that they wouldn't have bought on a PC, but they'll play on a handheld on the train. So therefore, same person buys more games, or somebody who doesn't have a PC but has a console buys the Steam Deck and then buys games off Steam. So you can see where they're doing it. That's the point of it. It's a route to market. So around 2021, Windows kind of pushed itself onto handheld PC gaming with the very first one that came out, the Win 3, I think it was called, and that kind of pushed Valve into thinking they need to react. The Steam Deck itself shows that it can be more performant to run games using Proton that are Windows-based, or DirectX-based, on their machine than it is on the Windows native platform. And that is the biggest slap in the face that I think Microsoft could ever get. But let's be honest, it's not a surprise. It's always been the case. And Windows continues to get worse. So as a huge, gigantic number of Windows users do just this, they only buy it for gaming. So there's a huge market for Windows here in terms of just people that have Windows for gaming and nothing more. And I use Unix and Linux in my day-to-day work and home life. So I know the realities of it and the benefits of it and the features it has, but in reality, Windows is the only gaming platform on PC outside of the Steam Deck, and recently Lenovo's Legion Go S in January, which has now awoken the sleeping giant and made Microsoft very, very aware, in my opinion, for them to see that this is a direct threat to their market in games. And even more so Windows. That is really the threat they're worried about, because Windows is their route to market. Everything sits around Windows. If they lose Windows, they lose any leverage they've got in the market. They've lost Xbox. So if they lose Windows, they won't have any mechanism to get you to buy stuff from the store and play stuff on their platform. And fundamentally, to take all your data and use it all for their own nefarious purposes. Let's be honest, most companies do that. And I know firsthand, so no one in the comments tell me that it's not happening. Trust me, I could tell you a lot of stuff if I was allowed to. So Asus are as good a partner as any that have a kind of a new proposed Xbox Windows handheld, allegedly. So this information is coming out, I think, later this year, and it's based on a reliable Microsoft informer. So Tom Warren over on The Verge, which I believe came from Jez Corden, an article on Windows Central. But long and short of it, these people are very heavily linked to Microsoft in terms of their info comes directly from there. So I don't disbelieve this information, and it's already been kind of severely hinted at by Phil Spencer. And like I say, it makes sense. I said it years ago, so it's not as if it's new. This isn't new. Sega did it. So Sega have always done it. In fact, they did it with the Mega Drive upwards. They had the Amstrad did the Sega Mega CD PC. So they've always done that, and it allows them to mitigate cost of production. So again, ROI. It brings more revenue in because you license the IP. Other people take all the risk making your manufacturers, and then it potentially extends your market if you're selling things. So all of it kind of feeds back to itself. Strategic partners, like I say, this is a classic example. So what I believe is the plan is the same one that I talked about in 2015 and kind of going forward, was that Microsoft to continue to attempt with the UWP apps, so the Windows Phone, the Windows Lite options, in terms of the Surface, and other areas a few years ago when they kind of consolidated all of their Xbox hardware and Surface hardware teams into one. So this meant at some point the operating system and the UI would need to be merged, with Xbox consoles long since running a lighter version of Windows via virtualization and abstraction anyway. So you can learn more on this way back when on my Our Consoles Just Weak PCs back in 2015, that video in fact, late 2014. The aim here was always the same, it's not changed. There's nothing's changed from Microsoft's view, it's just people don't see it. But this is why I'm saying I'm not a Nostradamus, it's obvious. So their aim will be easy. They have been shipping Xbox and PC games for many years now with cross-buy by the Xbox app and store. So almost certainly this will be a front and center on the new device. This will be something that you can just move into and pick up, buy a game, play it. That you can do it now on PC, you can do it now on Xbox, so long as you use that app. And you can push it across multiple devices. And it will also have the advantage of running Steam, I believe, which I've said before. This will likely be a side Xbox box. So you'll be able to sideload Steam in addition to having the Xbox Marketplace. Hence, I feel this new device will drop with a new operating system that will update the Xbox consoles at the same time or close thereafter, which will kind of blur those lines even more between the console and PC space. Remember the slogan, this is an Xbox, meaning Steam is likely to be a sideload option on that. The new hardware will be able to run both Xbox and Steam because they can't ignore it. They've never been able to ignore Steam. It's too big. It is gaming on PC in essence. And you can see the pain and choice between the Steam Deck and new handhelds, because if you're going to buy another handheld, or you're going to buy a PC and you're on console now, so say you're a PS5 player, this will be a target. They would have done market research on this and said, look, PS5 players are buying, and they're buying the PS Portal to play, somewhere else. So they're playing in the cloud, and they're, like I said on that one, in fact, I said they'd update it. They'll update it so that people are seeing that people are actually buying these now and playing games on the go. So they see a market for it because people's lifestyles have changed. People are living in smaller spaces. They're traveling a lot. They're on trains a lot. They're on planes a lot. So it gives them all these options as long as you've got Wi-Fi. But this means that they can tap into that market. And if they can do it without the risk of having to manufacture, produce, and ship all of these products, and just literally create the operating system, what they're good at, the software side, and palm it off to companies and allow them to create that and run it within their infrastructure, then you can have multiple specs. And this is what the future of Xbox is going to be. Multiple specs of Xbox that will be very PC-like versions that will have an easier UI, a little bit like Steam OS big screen, and it'll allow them to palm this off. And Asus is a good choice. So it's somebody that can get something out, and their path now will be to say, do you want a Steam Deck or do you want a brand new handheld from Asus that will likely be far, far more powerful than the Steam Deck? And just by how much, though, we'll have to find out just what the cost is. But it kind of makes sense. And I also think, and I've been on record saying this for a while, that the whole Xbox preservation team and such that was set up in last year, I think it was, is likely going to be focused on getting an emulator or even a static recompiler, as we've seen in kind of Xbox 360 BC titles, more recently on the PC in that Xenox recompile, Xenos, and prior to that, the N64 Zelda and Mario recompilers. What this means is that handhelds at first could finally offer a way to play all the current Xbox PC catalogue, a small subset, or maybe even more of them than what we've got now, in an expansion to try and reinvigorate that on this new handheld, using these methods, which means they can sell you stuff they already own on their marketplace. They can basically sell you your past, which is the perfect route to ROI. So I think that this is what they've been set up for. They've been set up to create this big USP for the handheld, and then generally an Xbox stroke PC, to be able to play classic, currently locked to old console games such as Panzer Dragoon Ultra, Jet Set Radio, and even more on the 360, such as like, I think Blue Dragon and Fable 2 are exclusive to it, and many, many more. Having all these run on a Windows handheld, and maybe later across all PCs under the Xbox app, aka Game Pass and whatever else they want to sell you, this would be a viable use of resource and time, and it would help drive more profit back into the coffers of Microsoft Xbox war chest, which has been severely emptied from the Bethesda and Activision contract. As I said, would be the case, and as I said, would negatively impact it. It was pretty obvious from the time when I told everyone, don't cheer this on. This is the death of Xbox as you know it. And here we are, the death of Xbox as we know it. But the death of Xbox means long live Xbox, because we've now got, all business aims aside, everyone is assuming that this is going to be kind of an AMD APU. So Microsoft don't have to go that way. That's the other thing we need to be aware of. The manufacturer of the hardware, it needs to be agnostic. And you're seeing very heavily links to Microsoft working with NVIDIA on the neural rendering technology they've pushed out with the RTX50 series. And I was there at the CES. I actually asked Jensen directly about the DirectX and Microsoft connection with that, and he said they're a key partner. At the end of the day, there's no enemies in business. This whole platform warrior thing is good for marketing. There's a great interview with Peter Moore the other week. I love Peter Moore. I think he's a great guy because he's really down to earth, and I loved him in the Sega side and I loved him in the Xbox side. And he is absolutely spot on. There's nothing wrong with platform wars. It's what happened back in the late 80s, early 90s with Nintendo and Sega, or specifically Sega. And it's always been the case. It happened with even earlier in the 80s with Speccy and Commodore 64, though that was most of us in the playgrounds and outside at work. But the reality is that there's nothing wrong with competition, but in business, competition is only good for an outside sale. It's not good internally. So it might be an AMD APU, it might be an NVIDIA solution, and they're moving heavily into doing NPUs, APUs, and that level of work will be a big key factor for them with the stuff they've done on the Switch. And then here, but it means more predominantly, it could be both. That's the point I'm trying to make. They're not locked in. It could be a choice made by the manufacturer, so the OEM can choose who they want to go with, and the software will just run on it. It'll be fine. So this means that the Xbox could end up being quite powerful. And if they did have an Xbox coming with a solution that was with this, which is what they might mean by the most powerful Xbox ever, if they went NVIDIA and they went top end, then yeah, they could create a box that is more powerful than anything else on the market in terms of console space. Top end PC hardware. So this is what I think is the starting point for this. I think this is the beginning of where their roots will be. And in the end, they'll stop making and they'll just license everything if it works out for them. Who knows? They don't know. No one knows. This is the plan. So business aims aside, it might be AMD APU, kind of RDNA 4-based GPU, Ryzen 9000 with an NPU. It might be NVIDIA. But fundamentally, we'll get the first fruits of FSR on this, or DLSS on this, if it was at NVIDIA, and possibly even the first signs of DirectX latest updates, like I just mentioned, that neural rendering stuff. So Microsoft have their own machine learning upscalers in the plan as well. So again, this means that they could incorporate that all into the APIs and the SDKs and DirectX, and then leverage this within a unique selling point for the actual device itself, or all Xbox devices that use their version of PSSR, whatever it might be called, XSSR or something, I don't know. You can go mad with acronyms, people do nowadays. They even reuse old ones, which confuses the hell out of me as an older tech guy, so happens all the time. But more importantly, they get great marketing points to sell the device and drive that gaming uptake on new technology. So I assume both NVIDIA and AMD will be supported fully from the Xbox hardware platform. Like I say, an Asus will be the starting point for that, whichever one they choose. Likelihood is AMD, I'm not going to lie. That is the most likely one that they'll pick, but it doesn't mean it has to be. And I assume it will come or sell with an easy USB-C docked HDMI, so you'll be able to have like a pad, mouse, keyboard, run it in mobile, run it on desktop, or even console-like in your sitting room with a very simple, easy-to-use Xbox UI that makes it a nice alternative, although it's likely going to be a very, 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 very small impact against the impending Switch 2, which will definitely dominate the market. It's not Microsoft's problem. They're just expanding their market. They're just getting more routes into their Xbox API and specifically into their Xbox marketplace. So That's the point. That's what I think will happen. I totally believe this story, and I think we'll see it very, very soon.
At Xbox, our passion is to help you find and play the games that you love through creation, curation, and discovery. The ultimate expression of that passion is Xbox Game Pass.
Retro news now, and I love me some retro news, but this one's a great one. Terminator 2D, no fate. And with retro becoming bigger and bigger ever, this new 2D platformer from the UK team, Bitmap Bureau, looks to be an absolute killer.
You're terminated, fucker.
Now, they did create the Xenocrisis PC console, Switch, PS Vita, and even Mega Drive port, I think, and others. I think it was on GameCube and Super Nintendo. And this is kind of modelled on Smash TV meets Aliens. But this is pulling from a whole other sci-fi inspired timeless blockbuster tale. The classic girl meets boy from the future, girl meets psychotic cyborg killer from the future, girl becomes badass soldier of the future for her son. Everyone knows this story, classic. So again, they're using their own engine, which is an abstraction to make it easy for multi-platform ports, and it was used in their prior games such as Xenocrisis, Final Vendetta, and it could even run on retro machines, as I said. So long as you've got sufficient RAM or cartridge space. Cartridge consoles are not confirmed on this one, I might add. I'm just saying that, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was. It looks exceptional. The animation is super smooth, exceptional art, creates key scenes in the movie. It gives me Ocean vibes of how they created the template for the movie licenses back in the 80s. So from Batman, which kind of set the watermark, and then Platoon, Hudson Hawk, Jurassic Park, Robocop 1 and 2, and obviously T2 itself, which was obviously far from a good game. At the time, everyone was rushing out to get it, and it was on everything. It was on the 8-bit, the Spectrum, the Amstrad, the Amiga, and the ST, and it wasn't great. It had some good touches, but fundamentally it was a bad game to play, and it didn't look excellent. And there were many, many others. And it's definitely mirrored on those kind of areas. And obviously the classics Mega Drive Terminator game itself and the excellent Mega CD version are all inspirations, clearly. As is the classic Konami Contra Super Nintendo game with the Mode 7 flyby firebomb here. And I love this effect where the hunter-killer is standing behind the tower and it blows it up and it comes through. Just absolutely exceptional. And it has those vibes of an enhanced Super Nintendo Mega CD game. And it does look like a cross between those Amiga Ocean classics, the SNES 2D style colour enhancements. Definitely it's got that SNES style palette, and even Saturn level peak 2D art and effects here. The missing link between the 16 and 32-bit machines should come as no surprise, as from the team behind it, starting with the art from back in the day lead artist Hank Neiberg, true pixel aficionado, started his professional career back in those glory days with the legendary Thalion and Lionheart, a true Amiga technical powerhouse I covered almost 8 years ago on my Amiga vs Atari ST dual header series. And it all kind of kicked off the world of combat in the 16-bit era, and certainly on the Amiga from Shadow of the Beast from the classic Martin Edmondson and the Reflections team, which went on to much greater things. And Hank was in that world making those games, and Lionheart was certainly a powerhouse in that area in terms of pushing the graphical quality of the Amiga. High quality, breaking the limits of 32-bit colours, dual playfields, all the technical aspects of the Amiga games really tried to push, and it's what made that machine last so long into the Mega Drive and SNES era. But fundamentally what we're seeing here is a continuation of that across into the modern style. So his style has always been kind of measured but flamboyant, and it comes from his limitations, or understanding the limitations of palette, memory and speed, and that limits through the 16-bit machines. And it's kind of provided Hank a unique skill in managing that lost art of getting so much detail and quality out of low bit colour palettes, such as the superb Bitmap brothers did of the same era in Mark Coleman and Dan Malone. They kind of limited themselves to 16 colours only based on the ST's maximum, and for their superb Xenon 2 Gods and Chaos Engine titles, again all covered in my same ST and Amiga series. And that style really presents itself here, and Henk has balanced those limits far more obviously into the art here, with clear kind of Mega Drive columnized colours and dithered effect patterns being visible in this game. It creates a game that looks authentic rather than pixelized art heavily into the style for the sake of it, and it achieves a genuine 16-bit 2D console Amiga stroke arcade game look from that early 90s period. Now, the technical skills also show the love for those tech leaders of the machines. I mean, Konami, Shiny, Blue Sky, Traveller's Tales, and of course Treasure. Now, using the same column and raster interrupt techniques of such games as Contra 3, Alexei, Vector Man, Earthworm, Jim, Gunstar, Heroes, Batman and Robin, among many, many more, they deliver that rotation quality on sprites and backgrounds, which the Mega Drive could not do in hardware, and the SNES could only do with backgrounds in its Mode 7 via hardware. And you can see the new game uses those same techniques to create the faux rotation effects on the helicopter, the scaling of the bomber and rockets, or the hunter-killer, which was all used impressively so on the Mega Drive and SNES to ensure that they could still keep pace with the incoming Saturn and PS1. And you can see that they lived through that same era, and if you did, you understand it and the reasons, and that is what they're going for here, and it really stands out. And I do expect to see more in the final game, such as the Street Fighter 2-like reference here with the T-800 destroying the cop car with the minigun as it breaks into chunks and bounces around. This is driven by the talented programmers, again within the team that back up that art, who kind of grew up in the same era. So the design director in Mike Tucker, the tech lead, and I think he does the abstraction engine himself, the coder, lead coder, Matthew Cope, with I think Gavin Ball and Steve Longhurst. I've got the names written down here, so apologies if I've got those wrong. And obviously well known to the retro coding scene is Quan Wen, who also shares the same passion and effort for the source and style. And it creates a game that looks authentic rather than pixelated art heavily into a kind of style. It looks like a true 16-bit 2D console game, and it really feels genuine to the era. And it even suggests that it sticks to a genuine 16-32-bit palette limit, and even sprite-like processes to create that accurate version of a game that could have been made back then, which they've kind of proved before with their engine, releasing on older, weaker hardware, the PS Vita, the Mega Drive, the Super Nintendo, in Xeno Crisis. Now, I have seen some say that it's far beyond the machines of the time, and that kind of shows that either you weren't there at the time or you've completely forgotten. I totally disagree. As I'm showing here and as they show, and that's totally inaccurate. It brings the console 16-bit, PC legendary Neo Geo arcade years into a meld of delicious retro arcade scrolling, frantic smooth, passion-fueled ingenuity, and I love it. I think it looks absolutely amazing. I love the arcade attract sequence, again, which leans into those limitations, and it uses the old preview of the Terminator 2 game before it came out, so the teaser that was released before anything from the film was released when they assembled the T-800 in the factory. They've used that, and that was actually on the T2 game on the Amiga as well, digitised from that same attract or teaser that came out for T2 in 1990, I think it was. I love that. I love the fact that you can see the movie art there. You can see that Arnie's there, but obviously his visage is not being used because maybe his price was far too high. But I'm glad that we've got Linda Hamilton. We need Sarah Connor. We've got the original John Connor from the film. And hopefully, maybe we might even see Michael Biehn, Edward Furlong, Robert Patrick's definitely there. So hopefully all the people in the game make the cut. And I cannot wait to play this as early as possible. And hopefully I'll get a chance to cover this game much, much more leading up to and over its launch period. It looks brilliant, it feels authentic, and as you can tell, I'm very, very excited. T2, I mean, it's one of the greatest films ever made.
The massive amount of pixel art and animations in this project is just insane.
Those little moments early on just really crystallised to us the level of quality that we could still do in the traditional retro style, but how we could really push it to the nth extreme.
So when I came on board and he told me what the project was, channeled me just was so excited and just exploding with joy.
We just enjoy what we do, and if we find success and make a few quid, that's great. But it's not really what drives us. We just want to make games that we enjoy ourselves, and hope there's an audience out there who wants to do the same.
Okay, the last piece of news we got is more rumours, and this one comes from Famiboard's user Secret Boy, which I saw over on Reddit, and this comes from the same user allegedly that previously leaked the specs, which turned out to be very accurate in terms of around just over 3 teraflops in dock mode and 1.7 teraflops in handheld mode, is now saying that the handheld itself supports 120Hz and VRR. Obviously that means it will do it on the screen, and it means it will do it when it connects to a screen as well, so 4K. Now, I've already said this before on my Switch 2 solutions. This is going to be an extension, and this makes sense as to why it's not an OLED, because the cost validation there would make sense, and the OLED means that they can go to that model later on and repeat what they did before, which is drum up additional sales, i.e. get new people to come in, and also get people that bought the 120Hz mode to later on then buy the OLED mode, which happened a lot with Switch, and that's helped drive a lot of the sales, I believe, in terms of the numbers they've reached to. It's getting close to 3DS levels now, isn't it? DS, I'm sure it's getting not 3DS, DS levels. So yeah, it's the Switch 2 does have the potential, I think, to be a very, very good handheld. Whether it'll achieve the original Switch, probably not, but this is good news, in my opinion, if it's true, and I can totally believe it is true, because the cost of a panel ain't going to cost the earth. So 120Hz VRR means that not only can developers then target a handheld mode at 40, whereas the docked mode can use 60, and then kind of balance out the effects between the two, and it means they don't have to push so hard to downclock everything and reduce all of the visual effects and CPU efforts. They can actually manage that by just taking off a third of the performance rate. So that helps significantly in the optimization work. But also it means that when you're running on a screen that supports 8 millisecond frame times, it means that you can actually run games at a much smoother rate. When with VRR, it means you can fluctuate anywhere between 40, 35 and upwards, and it will feel better than just a flat 30 that's jittering all over the place. So for me, I think this is good news. I think it's a great news for the tech press and the people that are into the tech side of the hardware and the console itself. I think it makes it much, much easier to scale across more games. That's probably another reason why they're doing it, with a lot of games now having 40 FPS modes, to make sure that all third parties can just, you know, lock, stock and barrel lift up their game engines and drop them in and tweak them accordingly for those settings. And if it does come out with a docked mode, you know, circa 3 teraflops, give or take, there's lots of other factors inside of that, you know, me and teraflops. But the reality is that with that memory bandwidth and footprint in terms of space, allegedly 12 gigabytes of allocated space to the machine itself for the games, then that means that this could be a very powerful handheld that could actually do a very good job in terms of exceeding, you know, levels that we're seeing on, or getting close to, the levels we're seeing on the Xbox Series S. Good enough, and certainly getting close to or beating the Steam Deck. And I think if it does have some level of DLSS, whether it's official from Nvidia or not, or whether it's Nintendo's AMD's, whether it's Nintendo's own version of an upscaler, they certainly have the clout and technical know-how to do it. We'll have to wait and see. But realistically, this is quite a good piece of news, I think. I can totally believe it's true. And it would go in line with the fact that they've got these mouse controls with the dock switch as well, with pulling them out and using them as a mouse. That means you've got high performance. If you've got a docking station, you can click it down, use it as a mouse. 120 Hz will make that feel far more responsive. Anyone that's used a 120 or 240 Hz screen with a mouse knows the smoothness can be felt probably better than most other things when you're using desktop. So again, this all adds up to, what are they trying to do? They're probably going to go heavy into art and creation side of it. Again, that's probably what the mouse thing is for, so they can lean heavily into games like Mario Paint and that kind of style. So I think that all of these things tied together means this feels very Nintendo-like, but the benefit of it is it means it can be used for multi-purposes, i.e. games, control, applications. So yeah, I think I'm impressed, and hopefully I think it will be true. I hope it's not a lie, and it is one of those rumours that does come true, but it does make a lot of sense. So the final piece for this video is kind of a catch-up on what I did at the start, which was before I managed to source my own version of a 9070 XT from AMD, or in this case from ASRock. I now have a card in my hands, and as I covered in the 5090, 5080 review, the demand on GPUs is getting crazy. It was very hard. I did put a tweet out at the time. I couldn't get one on the launch week, but I managed to get one the week after, and I've got myself on all the lists and managed to snag this one, which, as you're seeing this, is only about 2 days into my hands. So I will be covering it more in lots and lots of videos. Very interested to see how this runs. And I've seen reviews out there, but I'm trying to do something different. So look forward to my review on this, and I'm trying to make it very valid and not like everybody else's. So this is just a heads up to say I will have 9070 content coming up. I will be covering it far more in depth in terms of FSR4, how it runs against different cards, and obviously the 5080, 5090, which have got a bad rap. I mean, you know, I can't argue. I got one for review, and I said this to Nvidia directly. The lack of stock and the pricing is crazy. AMD are also guilty of what I said at the start before this came out, which is the prices are nowhere near MSRP. So look out for that very soon. Okay, we've come to the end, and even though it says retro news, if I don't I've got to skip retro news. I'm sorry. I kind of take the Terminator 2 stuff that I covered. That's the retro news for this week. But we have got some Patron questions. Again, if you are a patron, please fire them in. Our first one comes from Tired Gaming Dad. Some of these are very old, so apologies. Do you feel that in general on the internet too much emphasis is put on the frame rates, like a higher frame rate over just enjoying the game? I hear lots of discussions where, I've got to have super high frame rates, and I still remember just loving games at 30 FPS on my Xbox 360 and not care what the FPS was. I only really started focusing on trying to get better frame rates as a way to smooth out my experience due to the simulation sickness on the computer. But as I continue to play more and more and dabble around, have a consistent, solid, perfect frame rate is more important than a really high frame rate most of the time. It's those occasional jitters that mess with me and give me sickness. Tired Gaming Dad, good question. Great news, we all know what that feels like. So, yeah, absolutely. I think that when it comes to frame rates and resolution, which is another question I'm going to meld into this one that came at the same time. So this is from David Braithwaite. And he says, some good questions already, but I'd like to know what you think the sweet spot is regarding resolution. What combination of native resolution and upscaling does a good enough job? Then anything now has more, and anything beyond that has more diminishing returns. And do you think resolution will be put to bed one day? Remember when we still asked how many colours or sound channels a console had? No one worries about that now. Again, two very excellent questions and pertinent to the time that we're in. Diminishing returns are real. So taking the first one, but they are kind of one and the same thing. So there is a sweet spot, I believe. So when it comes to games, I think 30 FPS is the bare minimum. I think 60 FPS is the gold standard. And I think 120 FPS is the holy grail, and anything beyond that is gravy. That's my opinion. And I do believe that 120 FPS is only really pertinent when it comes to mouse and keyboard, because you can really feel it there. And I think that 60 can at times feel, especially in first-person games. So when you're playing fast-paced Twitch games, such as Counter-Strike or COD or Fortnite or whatever, then you can struggle at 60 FPS and competitive gaming. So that's where high frame rates matter. I think for average everyday gaming, it's irrelevant. If a game is running at 75 FPS and the same game is running at 120 FPS on a 120 Hz screen with VRR, most people are not going to notice the difference. There will be some impact, but again, the conversation, as I always say, it's not about frame rate, and I know that's what you meant, so I'm not saying you're wrong, Tired Gaming Dad, but it's frame time that's important. That's what you're mentioning in the jitter part. It is always about frame time, because at the end of the day, frame rate is just the output or the combined output of frame time. And developers work towards a frame time. They don't work towards a frame rate. So they work out how long do I have to do all the work I need within a frame. And that's why they stagger frames, which has latency. That's why they buffer frames. That's why they pass off and split up work into multiple channels. So most games or most engines have the ability to queue up the CPU work, throw it at the GPU, and then the CPU starts working on frame 2, and then whilst the GPU is working on frame 3, and then when frame 1 gets to the output at the end of the queue in terms of the pipeline, the ROPS section, they're already back into frame 2 and CPU's on frame 3. So all those things add up to the ability to make a 60 FPS game feel very, very smooth, and even a 30 FPS game feel smooth. And I think it all comes down to the combination of, like I said, the gold standard is 120, but that should never be, that should be the holy grail in terms of everyone should have that as an exception. With good motion blur, as long as it's not, overly aggressive and ruining the game, 30 FPS can still feel very, very good, so long as the input latency is kept to a bare minimum. And there's lots of tricks within the engine, which I won't go into here, in terms of what developers do use to minimize the input latency and certainly make it feel more responsive. VR uses a good technique in terms of that reference, in terms of warp space projection in the vision itself. So they leave the render of the game at 60, but they take and pervade your view, they render your viewpoint when you move your eyes. They shift it, they time shift it at the very last minute, and they run that at 120, the same refresh rate as the panel, which basically fools you. And VR is the one place where you can feel sickness. So I think that that's a technique that could still be used, and I think what we're seeing now with frame generation is trying to do that by interpolating those frames, by rendering them ahead and then filling in the blanks in between. I think some way they'll get in the middle of that. They'll work out a better way. And I've got a few ideas, but I'm not going to throw them out there now. I might do a full video on it at some point. But there's definitely some areas where you can improve that by improving the performance. But for me, frame time is what's important. So long as you have a target, if you consistently hit 33 milliseconds each and every frame and you don't peak and trough all over the place, like many games do, and stutters are terrible. If they're small, like a loading sector or cut between a cinematic, they're not too bad, and I think people do blow those out of proportion. It's where a game is consistently jittering back and forth. If it's not smooth, it doesn't feel consistent, and it's all around that pacing, that cadence of frames. So the frame time has to be close to itself at all times. So if you're aiming for 33, never exceed any more than 8 milliseconds, and that's where VRR can help. It doesn't magic. People will say VRR magically fixes it, and it annoys me because people have got this incorrect view of VRR. It doesn't do that. It literally just smooths out frame rates where the frame time can go a little bit out of sync, and effectively it masks the cost of VSync, as I've mentioned many times before. So where you've got a 33 millisecond half refresh on a 60 hertz screen, it means that if you miss that window, you've got to wait a whole 33 milliseconds before that comes round. So VRR means that you don't have to wait that long anymore. You can just flip it at the next 8 milliseconds. So it just makes that gap much smaller. So the judder doesn't feel as bad because you're jumping down to 8 and then back to 33. So I think that really 60 is what everyone should expect as a standard. I've said that, but 30 is perfectly acceptable so long as it stays within that 33 millisecond, 60 millisecond target. In terms of resolution, this is, again, one that I mentioned a lot. So for a 1080p screen, I believe that 900p with a good level of TAA lightly, or a good level of AA, so MSAA or sharpening on the textures, and not overly aggressive effects within the game that use sub-pixel elements such as alpha, hair, anything like that, then I think on a 1080p screen, 900 to 1080p is the right level. On a 4K screen, 1080p is too low. I don't care what anyone says, it's too low. It doesn't look good, it looks blurry, it looks upscaled. For me, the perfect balance is 1440 to 1620p. That's where a game should stick and render. And I would almost say that if you're rendering below that and then upscaling, in quotes, using FSR2, FSR3, DLSS3, whatever you want to do, XESS, some of those, depending on the game's style, I think it's worse. Because remember that the upscale cost using those temporal upscalers that reconstruct the image, they have a cost. They have an expense themselves. It's more expensive for a game to run at 1440p and then upscale to 4K than it is for that exact same game to just run at 1440p and let the console or the TV upscale to 4K using a spatial upscale, just stretching the panel. Yeah. So that is, I think, teams do generally make some bad decisions. They go down the route of being led by marketing, or they lead themselves down that garden path by saying we must say 4K. And I hope, and we are getting close to this, we're getting to the point now where we don't talk about resolution quite as much as we used to. So we don't get too bogged down in the raw pixel count anymore. Everyone's doing it. I mean, Digital Foundry tried to move away from it from a long time ago. And some of that is the push from the publishers when they give them code. And I know, because I've had these conversations, there can be a drive to not talk about the numbers or talk about them in a certain way. But again, this is like teraflops when I said exactly the same thing. You become a victim of your own noise, because if you make a marketing trumpet about teraflops and then all of a sudden you can't get teraflops out of your GPU, you can't just change that dynamic and that conversation with everyone in the market and then expect them to just ignore it. And resolution became this big trumpet thing. It's got to be 1080p, it's got to be 4K, and all of a sudden it's not. And I've said this before, now everyone's cheating by upscaling. Now everyone's cheating by frame generation and using, and they always have. Let's be clear. This is the whole misconception of resolution. Everyone talks about it like it's a gold standard across every aspect of a game. It's not, and it never has been. So I keep saying this. Various parts of a game render at different resolutions, and people always talk about the resolution, and it's based on the geometry of the scene or the depth buffer that the game is rendered at. But everything else in the game can be rendered at any other level. There's various things you could do to render everything at a cheaper cost and then improve it. And I think that a lot of things that happen now are around pixel counts rather than image quality. And image quality is the most important thing. You can have a 4K game and a 1440p game rendering in two different techniques with a different level of TAA, upscaling, sharpening, texture filtering, effects. All of those things will have a bigger impact on it than just that pixel count, even though one of them is significantly lower pixel count, almost half the amount from 1440p to 8K in terms of pixels on screen rendered. So me personally, I believe that the sweet spot is around, like I say, 1440, 1620p. And if you can render at that level and upscale to 4K with a decent level, and what does it mean decent? I mean good well implemented solutions. No one size fits all. There is no silver bullet. I keep saying this. Even DLSS 4, even DLSS 3, all of these things have edge cases. And whenever you're using a large language model, a small language model, any kind of CNN or transformer model, any fused network that balances image quality from generating a higher output image from a lower output image is based on edge cases, heuristics, and essentially an assumptive output or approximation of what that end pixel should look like. They won't work for every single situation. That's why you get certain types when they ghost, heavy contrast areas, lots of alpha. And again, this means that when you render at native pixel resolutions across the board, those issues don't stand out as much. But if you use lots of temporal reconstruction elements, or even just TAA to soften the image in terms of temporal anti-aliasing, which is not just spatial, it's temporal across multiple frames, your buffers, the weighting you have on the color balance, how you make sure that you don't hold on to a pixel longer than it needs to, clamping effectively, you keep all those things to a minimum. Otherwise, you could have the sharpest, cleanest texture in the world when you're still, and as soon as you move, the image blurs, and it can be in 84K, and it can still happen. So nothing, pixel counts on their own don't mean that much anymore. They just mean that you've got the better chance of a higher image quality, so long as all the other aspects I've just mentioned and more are in place. So long answer is yes, I believe we'll get there, but not for a while yet. I think we need to get to better solutions that are more ingrained, and the baseline is better, which means it needs to target the game type it is, the image and the screen you're rendering on. I think games should just literally, consoles now are more like PCs in that nobody really writes to the metal anymore. Everyone writes to the software, to the operating system. So they shouldn't bypass the operating system. Everything should be built within that limit. So the operating system should at least allow the engine to say, I'm outputting to a 1080p screen, so I'll just render at 1080p. Because there's no point in rendering at 1440p and downsampling, because that can have even though everyone says it's great, it's not always great. You could get better performance and better, the first question, if you did that, rather than rendering it for 1440p or 4K on a 1080p screen. It's a waste of pixels at that point. You're just getting super sampling, which is, good, but not worth the hit to performance. So overall, I think that resolution has a longer way to go to get to being erased from the minds of everyone talking about it, like color channels and sound channels, or palette colors and palette levels. I think frame rate will always be there. I don't think it'll ever go away. And I think that's simply because the nature of the beast is that people will always cut corners and make choices on frame rate. And with screens getting bigger and 8K, being pushed harder and harder by manufacturers, I could be completely wrong, and all this could get reset in 5 years when 8K comes out, and we're really going to struggle to push 8K native games on anything, even top-end PCs like the 5090. So it's not around the corner, in my opinion, and upscaling is here to stay. But I think that the conversation needs to shift away from pixel counts, as you say, and move more into the conversation around picture quality, which is always the real deciding factor on what a game looks like, in my opinion, along with, and that's everything. That's everything in terms of image, resolution, effects, animation, lighting, art style, all those things add up. So I think it's hard to say. I mean, look, play Pac-Man now, it still looks amazing, and it's probably got less pixels there's probably less pixels in that entire game than there is in an icon on an Xbox One game now, on the left-hand side of your screen. So that's the reality and how far we've moved forward. But have we really? Because we're constantly arguing about the same things that we always did. Is it smoother? Is it faster? Does it look better? And I think that when it comes to 3D, resolution and frame rate have an impact on you because of the way you move through the world. 2D is not quite as bad. So 60 FPS, you don't need any more than that for 2D. But for fast-paced 3D games, you definitely need more than 60 FPS if you're playing in a competitive area. And on a mouse and keyboard, I believe that 60 plus is better than 60. For consoles, 60 is fine, 30 is fine, so long as they keep consistently to their frame rate. And for resolution, 1080p-ish, just below 900p for 1080p screens. And for 4K screens, 1440p, 1620p-ish, with or without upscaling. And in my preference, if you can't do that level and you're at 1080p, then don't turn that off and go to a higher native resolution and let the screen or console do the work. Okay, that's it. I am out. I've gone way over an hour. I apologise for the tardiness of all these videos. Hopefully, I'll be back very, very soon with much, much more, and I do mean that because I've got quite a lot in the works. There'll be another database video this week as well, because this one is about 10 days late, and I'd already started on other stuff, and I was going to try and add it into this one, but I decided not to, so I'll be discussing that in about 2 days' time, and it'll be up in 2 days' time for my patrons, along with my first direct video for patrons as well, which is reviewing something new and exciting. Anyway, I will see you all very soon on the next one. Remember, like, subscribe, share, support. And if you are a patron, fire your questions at me and I'll answer them on the very next video. I'll catch you on the next one.
Many times you come around, you're still as mischievous as ever, eh?